They were only teenagers, captured far from home, told that Americans were monsters who would torture them. But when a group of German teen POWs arrived at a U.S. camp in 1944, they didn't find hatred. They didn't find brutality. What they found instead shocked them so deeply, many of them cried, not from fear, but from confusion. This is the true story of the German boys who discovered a version of America they never imagined existed. Most World War II stories focus on battles, but the war also created one of the largest prisoner movements in history. What few people know today is that tens of thousands of German POWs, many just 15, 16, or 17 years old, were transported to the United States. They expected cruelty. What they got was something entirely different, something that changed the lives of many of them forever. In the final months of 1943, hundreds of young German soldiers, some barely shaving, were captured in North Africa and France. Many of them were told they were being shipped to the land of evil. A 17-year-old POW named Karl Weber later wrote, "We thought the Americans would beat us. That was all we were taught." Their ship crossed the Atlantic under strict guard. When the Statue of Liberty appeared on the horizon, many POWs froze, not understanding how they ended up in the very place they were taught to fear. The boys arrived at Camp Rupert, Idaho, one of America's largest POW camps. They stepped off the trains expecting insults. Instead, the guards handed them sandwiches, apples, and bottled milk. Karl said, "We looked at each other. This could not be the enemy we were taught to hate." Some POWs were so confused they refused to eat. They thought the food was a trick. Only after the American commander took a bite of the same sandwich did they finally eat. Then came the second shock. Americans let them smile, speak, walk calmly, and didn't point guns at them constantly. One POW whispered, "Are we prisoners or guests?" The next days changed everything. The POWs were assigned to help American farmers with harvests. They expected forced labor, harsh treatment, punishment. But instead, American families from Idaho, Nebraska, and Montana brought them pies, hot soup, lemonade, and fresh bread. Many POWs cried when a farmer's wife offered them warm gloves because the boys' hands were cold. A 16-year-old POW named Heinrich said, "It was the first time since the war began that someone treated us like human beings." The farm work created unexpected friendships. American children would wave to the POWs. Some even learned German words to talk to them. One boy asked a POW, "Do you want more cookies?" The German teen couldn't answer because he was crying. Not from fear, but from kindness. One evening, after a long day of farm work, a group of American farmers invited several POWs for supper. This was technically against regulations, but common in rural areas. The German teens entered a wooden farmhouse and saw a set table, baked chicken, potatoes with gravy, corn, biscuits, and apple pie. Food they hadn't seen in years. One POW immediately broke down. Another whispered, "Why are you feeding your enemy?" The farmer replied, "Son, the war is out there. But in this house, you're just boys who need a meal." It was a moment that changed the German teens forever. As weeks turned into months, these young prisoners of war started noticing things that completely contradicted what Nazi propaganda had drilled into them. They saw American women confidently driving tractors in the fields. They saw black and white Americans working side by side, sharing a meal or a joke. They saw teenagers their own age laughing freely in the streets, without a hint of the fear and suspicion that had shadowed their own youth. They read newspapers that openly, and sometimes harshly, criticized their own government, something unthinkable back home. They saw people praying in churches, singing in public, and dancing in barns without fear of reprisal. It was a world of freedom they never knew existed. One of the boys, Karl, later wrote in his journal, "We realized we had lived our entire lives in a cage of lies. America was nothing like what we were told. But one of the most powerful and emotional moments of their captivity didn't come from a newspaper or a political debate. It came from a simple gramophone. One evening, an American farmer brought out his record player and put on some music for the German boys. It was jazz, blues, swing, the kind of music that had been banned in Germany, dismissed as degenerate and corrupting. The German boys sat in complete silence, their faces a mixture of confusion and awe. They were utterly mesmerized. Heinrich, another one of the young prisoners, later said, "We had forgotten what joy sounded like. The rhythm was infectious." Soon, a few feet started tapping to the beat. A nervous laugh broke the silence, then another. Some of the boys even tried to dance, awkwardly mimicking the swing they'd only just heard. For the first time in years, they weren't soldiers. They weren't prisoners. They were just teenagers again, feeling a simple, uncomplicated happiness. A final wall came down because of a single photograph. One day, a POW was helping clean a farmer's home when he noticed a small, framed photo on the wall. It showed a family, a father in a military uniform, a smiling mother holding a baby, and two older children standing beside them. And in that instant, he saw it. This house, this family, looked exactly like his own home back in Germany. The same simple furniture, the same loving expressions. He whispered to his friend, his voice filled with shock, "They are just like us." That simple realization shattered the last barrier of hatred and propaganda. Enemies turned into humans. And slowly, humans turned into friends. That night, huddled in their bunks, several of the POWs made a pact. They promised each other that if they survived the war, they would never, ever forget the kindness they had received in this unexpected place. And as history would show, many of them kept that promise for the rest of their lives. Months later, as the war in Europe neared its end, the time came for the German teens to be transferred. On the day of their departure, the American farmers and their families lined the road to wave goodbye. There were no cheers of victory, no taunts for the defeated enemy, just quiet, heartfelt farewells. Some of the German boys cried openly, unashamed of their tears. Some rushed to hug the farmers, who had become like father figures to them. Many promised to write, and they did, sending letters for years to come. As Karl boarded the truck to leave, he turned to the farmer he'd worked for and said, "You treated us better than our own army ever did." After the war, many German soldiers returned to a homeland in ruins. They were broken, traumatized, and haunted by what they had done and seen. But those who had spent time in America carried something different with them. It was something rare and precious in a world consumed by destruction. Hope. They had gained a new perspective, and they carried the memory of unexpected kindness in the heart of enemy territory. Many of these former POWs would later tell their children and grandchildren, "Never believe the propaganda of hatred. I met Americans during the war, and they saved my soul." It was a quiet, almost forgotten chapter of the war, a story of enemy teenagers discovering compassion in a world that had been built on fear. It was a true moment when, for a little while, humanity defeated war. Thanks for watching.